Let's go.
You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
I have fun every day. I have some more fun today. That's just how it works. The working title of this podcast is How We're Going to Fix AI's Messy Data Problem. And here to do that with me is Andrea Muttoni. Some of the background is, and let me do my best, and as always, I will turn it over to Andrea after this, but Andrea is the president and CPO of Story. Now, Story is about AI native infrastructure for IP, intellectual property. The saying that I see, if you go out there, you go to the website even, it says AI's next leap depends on unlocking the 80 trillion IP asset class. Story tokenizes IP and makes it programmable from ownership to remix to monetization. Andrea, look, that's a lot for my mouth to spew all that out. And so I'm going to have you explain that to me in simple details, because this is the Making Data Simple podcast. Before I go into that, tell us a little bit about yourselves. I get to know you this first time you've been on the podcast.
Yeah.
Let us know a little bit of your history. Oh, there you go. I like it. I like you already. Give us some history and what brings you to today.
Yeah, sure. First off, thank you for having me. Very much looking forward to our conversation today. A little bit about me. I'm Italian, although I don't sound Italian, and that's because I grew up pretty much all over the world, including the U.S. When I was little. I know how you used to work at, or currently work at IBM. My dad worked at IBM for 30 years.
Fantastic.
Plus. So I grew up in an IBM family, and people tend to say that IBM stands for I've been moved, or at least used to stand for that. And I can definitely confirm we were traveling and moving every 2-3 years around the world. After uni, I got into the AI space before it was cool. So I started at Amazon, and I was one of the early team members of Amazon Alexa in Europe. Back when Alexa was a tiny little room with blurred out glass, and you had to have a special key card to get in, and that was really the early days of Alexa. And Alexa is a perfect example of like AI, and it was just trying to achieve what we have today, but with technology that was still just not there yet, right?
We hadn't seen the LLMs.
Yes.
At that point. So
And another fact about back then, saying that makes me feel like it's like a super long time ago, but really 1 year in the AI landscape feels like 10 years. But back then, the AI systems, and this podcast is all about data. There was so much manual data curation and licensing to make Alexa what it was, right? I don't know if you remember, but for a brief moment, Alexa, you could set up custom voices for Alexa.
Yeah,
right?
You can't do that anymore?
I'm not sure, honestly.
Because I had an Australian voice for a while. It was just cool. Anyway.
Yeah, like Morgan Freeman's voice, right? And,
I didn't know that. Anyway.
And Samuel L. Jackson, I think, was the voice that you could license or that you could use. But all the data that went into Amazon Alexa was very much curated, licensed. Even these custom voices, they had like deals set up, and it was a very different time. Now, AI with LLMs, it really is just about trying to ingest as much as possible, right? And it kind of changed the landscape of not so much the models, which we know are making leaps and bounds every day, but also the data that powers them. And we can talk about it later. I'll just finish up giving a little bit of an intro about myself. So I was at Amazon for about 7 years, and then I became within Alexa and within Amazon. I was also dealing in some ways with intellectual property. Around 2021, this is when crypto had its, very big foray into the world, where it became mainstream. Matt Damon did Fortune Favors the Brave commercial, right? Like this was like peak crypto craze, and it
also went down during that time for a bit. But anyway,
shortly after, and so I got into the crypto space, specifically focusing on IP, actually, because I worked at Dapper Labs, which was the company behind NBA Top Shot, right? So NBA Top Shot is a collectibles game where you can collect NBA moments. So there was a lot of IP licensing there. And I was at Dapper Labs and Flow, which is the blockchain that powers all the experiences that Dapper Labs created for 2 years. And then 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, I joined Story, which was also very, very early. I was one of the first 10 or so employees at Story, and that's where we kind of realized that, hey, the world is changing quickly, and AI not only put an accelerator pedal to this quick change of how content is being created, right? The internet already changed the way content is being created. There's a lot of peer-to-peer creation, a lot of peer-to-peer remixing, but with AI, it's like an exponential explosion of creation, right? And the traditional IP system, the traditional ways in which we think about intellectual property were really outdated and are not able to support this new reality, and it's impossible to stop it, right? Like we really shouldn't think about, oh, how do we stop creation from happening because it's IP is protected. This is happening. We need to think of a system that is compatible with this new reality while preserving and protecting IP at the same time. And that's why Story was born. It really is the IP infrastructure for the internet in the age of AI, right? And we can get into a little bit more detail around what that specifically means. But
look, you've explained at least some of it to me, and there's enough of a hook there that I got many different questions. Before I go into that, what'd you graduate in? So what's your background in terms of your
I have my undergrad was in finance and my master's was in applied economics. But while I was studying both undergrad and graduate programs, I co-founded a company where we were it was basically an engineering consulting company. So we were creating full stack applications for different companies. So I was an economist on paper and a software engineer by trade. And
well, you're trained to run a company. Works out good. And pick stocks. So you can give any stock picks that you would like anytime along this podcast. It'd be perfect.
Yeah.
What I want you to now describe the core mission of Story in your own words. I mean, just to repeat what I said to begin the podcast, it's AI native infrastructure for IP. Yeah. By the way, if I stop now, based on what you said, look, we got an IP problem. So I presume you're going to go into this, but it's like everything's free for all right now. At least it feels like it's free for all. If you're on the internet, you're in an LLM. It doesn't matter if it's a copyrighted book or otherwise. It doesn't matter. But you start out with AI native infrastructure for IP. Then you say AI's next leap depends on unlocking the 80 trillion IP asset class. Story tokenizes IP and makes it programmable from ownership to remix to monetization. Tell us about this.
Absolutely. So I know that blockchain, especially given that this podcast is not a crypto specific podcast.
We talk about everything, man. Don't worry about it.
I know that crypto can be a very polarizing topic, and I do I fully recognize that a lot of use cases of crypto, arguably are a nice to have, right, and could probably be done in a non-crypto way. However, if you think about it, intellectual property is a perfect use case for crypto and for blockchain, because intellectual property requires a ledger that shows proof of registration, proof of attribution, and when, right? A ledger that anyone should be able to access and read from, but not just anyone should be able to write to or edit, right? And that is exactly what blockchain is. Anyone can read from the blockchain, and people can write to it, but you need, if you want to write to specific things, you need to have the permissions for it, and so we can create a global IP registry that is publicly accessible, viewable by anyone, and editable by everyone, but just not anyone. And that is the fundamental foundation of Story, right? An IP registry. But it's not just about it's not about just having a registry. It's also about licensing. So not just the defensive angle of I'm going to register my IP on Story so that I can prove that I created it in this so-and-so date, but I'm going to register it and set my licensing terms so that if anyone else sees my IP and wants to use it, my terms are there up front and they could license it and go with it permissionlessly, right? So today, if you find a cool image on the internet, you have two choices. You either copy it and make t-shirts with it because you have no idea how to reach out to the original creator, or you go through the hassle of tracking down who the original creator is, and sometimes you may be successful, sometimes you may not even know who that creator is, sometimes you may find out who they are but they won't respond to you, and this just compounds as the IP is more and more famous because harder and harder to get their attention. But what if we
can I pause you there?
Yeah.
I mean, but is this the honor system, Andrea?
No. I'm talking about how this works today. If you're trying to use the traditional IP method, right, which is
okay,
like trying to license something that you without having a direct contact with the IP owner is very, very hard. However, if the IP owner, and this is where Story comes in, if the IP owner registers their IP on Story and sets their licensing terms up front, then you don't need to reach out to the IP owner. You can find those terms and get a license automatically And that's what makes it ready for the internet scale, because IP can seamlessly be licensed programmatically, can be licensed through easy to use interfaces if you're not a developer, in one click. And you don't need to go through that whole hassle of tracking down who the IP owner is, negotiating terms. Everything is done up front and is made available to anyone who wants to license it.
It makes total sense to me. The only concern I have is going back to the honor system.
Yep.
It feels like people are ignoring the rules today.
Oh yeah, but there's two sides to that, right? I think there's people who ignore the rules and would ignore them anyway. But I think there's a majority of people who ignore the rules because there's no easy way to do it. And one analogy that I think is very similar and can help understand, like, the shift in what we can bring if we make IP easier is, if you remember back in the day, before Spotify, before Netflix, before YouTube, the easiest way to get a hold of a piece of media, whether it was a film or a song, right? Was pirating it, right? It was easier to pirate something than it was to go, like, get in the car, go to Blockbuster and rent the movie, right?
Yeah.
However, when Netflix, Spotify, Prime Video, YouTube came along, it became a lot easier to just access that content legally because the legal way was the easiest way. And I think we are in the Blockbuster era of IP right now, right? And if we want to make IP, like, the default way to deal with everyone's intellectual property, as easy as copying and pasting an image, we need to make licensing IP as easy as copying and pasting, right? And that's what Story is doing, is you can license and mint. You can license a piece of content in one click just as easily as you would copy and paste an image from the internet, right? And so I think that's the big shift. So going back to your question, right, the honor system, and, like, there's a lot of people today that don't follow the rules. I believe that a large majority of people who don't follow the traditional path of licensing content appropriately is because they don't really have an easy option to do so, and may not have the negotiation leverage, may not have access to even attention of the owners of the IP to even start to license it legally. Whereas if things were made available programmatically, then a lot more people would license IP legally. We just have to make it easier, right? And that's what Story is doing.
I think that makes sense. The only thing is, maybe you have more a positive view on most people than me. I think there's a lot of people out there that will pirate it intentionally. No different than Napster. In the music case, you gave the Netflix case, which I get. On the music case, it was, you knew where to get the music, and it was pretty easy even at that point. But boy, Napster was really easy.
Napster, yeah, is easy, but now Spotify is even easier, right? You don't need to worry that the file you're downloading is the right file. You don't even have to download it. You can just stream it. Like, Spotify made it so easy to access the music, the world's music.
Yeah, but let's be honest, Napster got put out of business in their case, or they'd probably still be here today. Now, having said that, you make certainly a good case that there are a lot of people that do want to follow by the rules, particularly corporations that may want to use some of this information. And I think more than that, they don't want it to come back on them. In other words, if I use something today, I meet with a lot of clients, and today they know that they're using these LLMs that are using books and stuff like that. And, they're still worried about how that's all going to end up. If they had a way to know that, hey, I'm good, you might be in good shape in terms of, they're going to try to make sure that they're on the up and up. And if they've already got a legal vehicle to do that. But speaking of, where does the money change hands? Let's say if I go and I see, I'm looking at some asset, I want to use that asset. Do you serve as the broker too, or how does that work? Or are you just creating the connection between the owner of the IP?
Yeah, so that's the beauty of Story, is it's more than just registration and IP registration. It's more than just licensing. Every IP asset on Story has license terms attached, or multiple sets of license terms attached, and it has the royalty pipelines built in already. You can, as the owner of the IP, you can choose whether to make the license available for a fee, or make the license available freely in exchange as part of the license terms for a royalty percentage, right? You need, I want 10% of anything you make if you want to license this IP, right? And that can be settled directly on Story as well. So it's both the registration and attribution layer as well as the economic layer. And this is trustless and peer-to-peer as well.
So you're the end-all be-all, though, in between these two entities, one way or another. Or they could probably go around if they chose to do so. I don't know. What if they chose to do, though? Do you still get what's your monetization in that case? Can they look and they say, oh, company X is licensing this or individual X is licensing this. I'm just going to deal with individual X.
Yeah. So the advantage for, and we're getting a little bit in the weeds here, but like the advantage for doing it on story is some IP ownership is often very fragmented and complex, right? It's very rare that one individual owns 100% of the IP. The more valuable the IP becomes over time, right? And so one of the things that story has built in as well is the ownership of the IP and the entitlement to the royalty revenue of that IP can be fractionalized and shared and spread among a lot of different parties, right? And so whenever royalty accrues to that IP, it can automatically get distributed in the right portions to the corresponding parties. So every party is incentivized to make sure that the settlement happens on story, because otherwise that those splits, which can get very, very fine-grained and complex, are 100% respected all the time, right? So it's kind of like we're incentivized to use story because we know that we'll get our fair share.
Were you one of the founders of the company?
I was an early employee, but
so close enough.
Yeah.
I mean, you were very close.
Yeah.
I got it. The only reason I asked that is, I guess I'll still ask that, is what inspired the creation of the company? Somebody must have saw something somewhere. Obviously, there is an IP issue. I mean,
the founder of the company, he worked in the IP and media space his whole life. His last company called Radish was a collaborative fiction company, and he sold that to the Google of Korea for almost $500 million. And that's what prompted him to start thinking about how can we fix this IP problem that he was already seeing in his own, in his everyday life. I was seeing this in my own everyday life when it came to licensing big IPs for experiences like NBA Top Shot. I also, before working on Amazon Alexa at Amazon, I was working on the Kindle side. So working with physical book publishers and working with their IP to make it digital. Everyone that comes to story kind of buys into the vision because they've had some sort of experience with IP and they know that it needs to modernize. And honestly, traditional media is definitely important, but one could argue that there are existing IP rails for it, even though they may be, antiquated and very inefficient. What doesn't have existing IP rails, and what I'd love to, talk about with you today, is the whole side of AI, because AI is unexplored territory when it comes to IP, and we're kind of building, the whole industry as a whole is kind of building building the boat as it's navigating, or building the airplane as it's flying, right? I'd love to kind of paint the picture of the urgency of this problem, because I think a lot of people underestimate just how big of an issue it is today.
I worry about people actually doing the right thing. I mean, I think the only reason, it's not like I don't trust people or something. It's just that everything is ubiquitous right now. You just go on any one of the frontier models, ask something, and you don't even think about anymore whether it's something that's copyrighted or not. You just keep going and keep going and keep going.
Well, that's why it's important. Yeah, that's why it's important for the models or the agents that that are built on top of these models to be the ones that respect and deal with IP. And that's why Story is focusing so much on AI right now, because humans are imperfect by nature. Agents can deal with a lot more complexity naturally. And it's not just the agents, but having full attribution of the training data that goes into a model, having full attribution of what data went into creating the training data, because training data is like processed data. It's not just a random collection of raw data. It has to be processed and packaged. So there's different layers to the whole stack, right? There's raw data, there's training data, there's training data that goes to train a model or fine tune a model. And then there's the inference, which is like when you use a model to do something or get some form of output. And one prerequisite to being able to fairly compensate everyone that was involved in making that model possible is to have full attribution all the way back. And that's what Story is doing. So we are becoming the full end-to-end provenance layer of everything from raw data all the way to packaged training data that goes into a model. And we also have an incubated company called Poseidon that focuses specifically on sourcing, processing, and packaging training data, using Story as the IP backend. Because if you don't have attribution, you're never going to be able to fully know who is involved and who should be compensated. But we definitely need to create a win-win mechanic in AI for it to be sustainable long-term, right?
So I got some questions to break down on AI, and I also got some questions on what would this look like if I was a client. How do I contact you to not just use Story for IP, but to use Story to set up my IP. But
Yep.
before I do, I just want to clarify on a couple things. One is, you said 80 trillion IP asset class.
Yeah, that's an estimate from the WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization. Think about it, more or less everything in the world is some form of intellectual property, right?
That's why I asked. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and so they estimate that it's currently worth, it's a significant part of the global GDP, which roughly equates to 80 trillion. But if you think about it, it's not just traditional copyrightable media like songs and films and visual identities and brands. There's also patents. There's also now training data and all that side of IP, which is, again, pretty much unexplored territory. There's, for example, fashion brands, right? There's internet native IPs. There's TikTok native IPs. Like even memes are becoming multi-million dollar IPs. I saw that Kabilame just sold his company for like 950 million, and his IP is really just reacting to things on TikTok, right? So IP itself can take so many different shapes and forms that it really is just pretty much a significant majority chunk of the world GDP.
Who's your biggest competitor right now?
I would say the biggest competitor is the status quo, right? Companies wanting to deal with IP the way that they've always dealt with it. And I think some companies will want to do that because the opaqueness, the slowness, the bureaucracy gives them a layer of defensibility in their minds, right? And that's why we're also focusing on AI so much, because there is no competition. Like the competition is not having to deal with IP and just reacting as issues come up, right? For example, back in the day, I think it was like 1 or 2 years ago, Reddit struck a deal that says, okay, you've been scraping all my data, pay me a certain amount per year to access my data. The companies that are able to, or I think there was also something around that with the New York Times, but like the companies that are able to strike these types of deals need to be big enough to have significant leverage, right? And so it's important that from the bottom up, we make everyone's data, everyone's contribution to any AI model attributable. And that way, the monetization system that is created, this really depends on how that specific model is used and where, has awareness of what data it licensed from who, and therefore what terms need to be respected in order to use that data properly. And you only do that if you have strong attribution from the start. So it really is it all starts with proper attribution, right? So it starts with proper registration, proper licensing, and Story makes that possible in the age of AI.
Let's go back. Let's double click on your definition of AI native.
Yeah.
What is it you're doing around AI native that makes it, you have AI everywhere?
Yeah, we have AI everywhere. And if you think about AI, there's like 3 main pillars, right? There's 3 broad pillars. There's compute, there's models, and there's data, right?
Yep.
Compute is, in other words, NVIDIA and the few other competitors that are trying to catch up, like AMD.
Okay.
And it's a very commoditized and very, very massive CapEx and OpEx type of landscape, right?
I don't know what they're charging right now. I don't know if it's commoditized anymore, but anyway.
Yeah. I mean,
it will be someday.
But like, it's okay, maybe not commoditized, but it's monopolized. Okay.
Yeah.
And really it's just about compute, but like the compute itself, prices aside, is very easy to source because there's hundreds or even thousands of companies that offer compute on demand. So if you need to train models, you don't even need to worry about what graphics card to buy. You can just use services that help aggregate graphics card from either other companies or from individuals, right? And there's thousands of companies doing this now. So in a way, compute is commoditized, even though it may be very expensive. The models themselves definitely are proprietary black boxes, but the capabilities between Claude, OpenAI, Gemini, Meta's assistant, Grok, it's always a toe-to-toe race. And sometimes one model pulls ahead slightly, but then the others catch up in a matter of like a month or two max, right? So the models themselves are also very much a toe-to-toe race where there isn't really much. I think it's also kind of a saturated space because users don't really care about what model they're using as long as it can do what they want well, right? So I switch between Gemini, Claude, OpenAI all the time, and I have no loyalty to any of them, right? The third big pillar is the data. And the data, I would really think of it as the new fossil fuel for AI. The data is the ultimate scarce resource that sure, every single AI company has, scraped all the data that was available, but now they're looking for data that is not available on the internet, right? Data that is, oh, can we get this really rare recordings of these dialects that, there isn't that much content on the internet about? Or can we get egocentric data of people doing actions every day set up in a specific way so we can help robots act better, right? These are just random examples of how there will never be enough data, because even if you have a good starting amount of data, it goes stale over time as the world changes. So data will always be in demand and will always be needed to be refreshed. And so data and training data is intellectual property for AI, right? Going back to your question, the way that Story is tackling this, right, is to focus on hard to scrape rare data that can't be easily scraped on the internet, right? Real world, domain specific, voluntarily contributed by people all over the world. And Poseidon, which is our incubated company, is doing this. They collected 5 million voice samples from all over the world, specifically a lot of rare languages that are very hard to access, and have now compiled a data set that is being made available that has 33,000 hours of voice data that AI models can use, right, and license. And why does this matter? Because the data that is collected in this way is higher signal, is legally usable because it's fully end-to-end attributable. All the raw data is fully registered on Story, licensed on Story. It gets processed and packaged into training data set, but the raw data is all fully IP safe. And therefore, there's a lot of legislation now starting around requiring introspection and attribution for training data sets. The black box model is slowly becoming pretty much illegal, right? This is starting in EU. This is starting in California. So this need to have very strong awareness of what data went into models that you're using, both as a company and as an individual, but especially as a company, is going to be a stronger and stronger legal requirement. And so having models and having training data sets that you have full attribution around, and you can have the full receipt of this is exactly what data went into this model, is going to be very, very important. And that's why Story is focusing on this as well. That's the kind of big challenge that we're focusing on, right? It's the fossil fuel for AI. And I think it's going to be win-win for everyone, because companies and model companies are going to get data that they can safely use. Contributors of that data will be compensated and will feel like they're getting something back. The models will get better because they have high signal rare data that they wouldn't get otherwise. And users can access models that are much more capable, and it creates this, and they're therefore more willing to contribute data because they're also getting something back. So it's like a virtuous flywheel that kind of changes the relationship with users and the models that they use.
This is going to seem like a strange question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. That's what I do. But what data do you think should be protected by IB and what should not? I get your language example. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of data out there. I mean, and like you said earlier, every data could have some certain IP. I mean, where do you draw the line?
I think it really depends on the use case for the model. I think some data that could be useless for one model could be very precious for another model, or at least the use case that the model is trying to perform. So to give you an example, I think there's it's not just the type of data, but it's also the novelty of the data. So in AI, let's say you're training a medical model, right? Like a model that's trained to recognize certain patterns of X-rays, right? If you feed it 10,000 images and 9,000 of those images kind of focus in on the same type of signal, right? Which is like, oh, this type of, I don't know, I don't want to get too negative, but like this type of lump, right? Then the other 1,000 that look at other edge cases are going to be much more relatively valuable for the model than the 9,000 put together, because there's just so much abundance of that one type, right? And so when we talk about rare data and high signal data, it's data that introduces novelty and new awareness to the model, right? So really, it's kind of like an economy. It's like a market, right? So as models get saturated with a specific type of data, let's say English language data, then very rare languages, maybe like a strange dialect that is spoken in a certain part of a certain region in India, becomes much more valuable because there's so little of it, right? And this will always change over time because it's a very evolving space. We're not in a steady state. We're in a massive, all hands on deck. That's
why I mean, look, I think you're absolutely right. I think this is interesting. You could be you are on the initial onset of something that could, just absolutely take off. I know you believe that to be the case because you're there. I mean, totally get it. But we just need to get some of these frontier models to show where the data is coming from to start. I mean, some of them I feel like they're so far away. One thing I like about being at IBM, we have some models as well. We produce data sets of, or fact sheets, if you will.
Mhm.
It says where everything's coming from. OpenAI, ironically called Open, I mean, you don't know where that data is coming from, and they don't even tell you. They won't give you the model parameters. They won't give you anything. They just say, you can use it if you want, and you're going to pay. And same with other frontier. I'm not picking on them, but I mean, like, we've got a long way to go, don't you think?
Absolutely, absolutely. But we can't expect things to change overnight, right? And I think the best way to go about it is to, okay, any new data that is sourced through the story ecosystem will have that attribution, will have that licensing, and so we can like start by being the change in the world that we want to see, right? And we don't expect to overnight for every single model company to switch to story. We are already talking with big AI companies, and I'm optimistic that the whole world wants to the whole AI industry wants to move to a model where things are more transparent and more.
I think it's going to normalize. To your point, It's got to over time, and the legislation is going to work in your favor one way or another. It depends on how far it goes, and you're right. It's always going to start with Europe, EMEA, and then it'll come to California. So I think you got the right order. That's where it's. Tell me about the blockchain. How you talked about attribution. I think it was. Data rights, provenance, monetization. How you're doing that, and what makes story so special.
Yeah. So when we say, IP layer of the internet, like what does that mean technically? As we discussed earlier, it means registration. Therefore, it means representing ownership. It means licensing. It means that the economics travel with the data and the models. I mean, I'm staying within the realm of AI for now, but this applies to traditional media as well. And this is possible through some core protocol primitives that we have, right? So IP registration is the obvious one, and everything starts with that, right? It has to be registered so that it's part of the protocol. Programmable licensing. So it's not that you have to write your custom license every time you register a piece of IP, but we have a uniform copyright-based license, a universal license called the programmable IP license. And it's a standard template that you can obviously personalize the parameters of in a very easy way. So, and that rasterizes to a full legal document when you need it. But all of those parameters are represented on chain as programmatic parameters. So you can query different license parameters of different IP assets as needed, right? So we're kind of turning code or law into code, and once it's code, it can be transferred back into like traditional law text form as well. Mm-hmm. And once you have those components, it becomes very easy to have provenance tracking that's built in, as well as global settlement. As I said, there's a whole protocol called the royalty module, which deals with making sure that who is owed what. And it's not just one IP independently, but let's say you license 1,000 IPs together, or you license derivatives, right? A derivative IP is built off of an existing IP, and based on the license terms between the parent and the child IP, there can be some, royalties owed, because to create a derivative you need to license the parent. And so when the derivative accrues revenue, that also flows up to the parent or to the grandparents or to the ancestors, right? So it really is about making all of those complex relationships between IP very, very easy and built in. And this applies to data sets, it applies to models, it applies to derivatives, of course, it applies to whole agent workflows. I wrote a paper last year, November of 2024, around agent-to-agent transactions, around specifically focused on IP and how agents in the future, and we're starting to see this now, everyone is starting to have their own agent, right? Whether it's Claude or something similar. And those agents will need to be able to perform tasks on your behalf, and they will have the agency over time to negotiate with other agents. And some of that negotiation will also include or encapsulate some form of intellectual property. So being able to negotiate and license intellectual property to some degree is going to be important. And so there needs to be a programmatic layer for that to happen, right? A standard layer. And that's also where story can come in and be that layer for it. So over the past year, and the reason I've been focusing on AI so much is we've seen the strongest pull, right? Where this realm of data and AI intersect. And this is, I think, where story has the most leverage at the moment, because there isn't an entrenched existing IP system, right, like the Disneys of the world have, or the other big IP owners have, where they don't really need to change their model because they have a thousand lawyers that help them with it.
But they're keeping most of their stuff behind the firewall.
Exactly.
They got 1,000
Exactly.
lawyers. No,
Exactly.
Now, before we run out of time, I'd like to ask a question this way, Ben.
Yeah.
For the people that are listening, what's the simple, like if, let's say I'm a company that wants to protect my IP,
Yeah.
what's the simple steps you would suggest they take? Secondly, for somebody that doesn't want to, company or not, doesn't want to risk using something that should be IP'd that may come back to haunt them, what's your steps for them?
Yeah. So in the first case, I would distinguish between whether they're an AI company or not. But regardless, it all
Let's
starts.
go with AI company since we're on the AI thing.
Yes.
Go ahead and go with AI company.
Okay, then I would make sure that any data or model that they create is registered, and ideally everything that happens behind it. So like if they're registering a model, they should also register all of the training data that
What if they don't own that trading data, by the way? I mean, because a lot of times it's like it's the internet itself.
Yeah. Well, in this transition phase before everything will ultimately be on story, right? Then as long as they legally have access to that data, then they can, as part of registering the model, add a and they'll need to do this sooner or later legally, right? Whether it's through the EU AI Act, the FTC, California's AB 2013 law, like they're going to need to do this, but register and show, hey, here's all the training data that went into it, and you can do this. We support custom terms as well, or custom metadata when you do register an IP asset, and that will at least give transparency. They will get the benefit of registration and being able to seamlessly license their model to anyone that needs it. But for everyone else, there's going to be transparency around, okay, so this model has this data in it. I see. Okay, cool. And that's for the first part of the question. The second part of the question,
where's that monetized before you go to the where's it monetized before you go to the second part?
I think it really depends on the company, right? So like if they want to license it, if they want to license that model to others, then it can be monetized directly on Story. If they're not looking to monetize it and are just using the model for their own business purposes, right? Whether it's through a front end or whatever, then at least they have proof of, hey, like this model was registered on this date and has these characteristics. So if someone else uses it, they have some defensibility.
If I do that, I mean, give me a ballpark. I mean, what kind of costs are people talking if I do it on Story?
Oh,
say I go to Story.
It's basically free. To register your IP on Story is very, very small fractions of a single cent.
Too good to be true. So you got to be making money somehow, Andrea.
Well, the blockchain itself is a decentralized entity, right? And there's if Story becomes the standard layer on which IP is registered and transacted on, over time with enough volume, Story itself as an ecosystem will be successful. So right now we're not focusing on extracting as much value as possible from it. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for companies to register and license their IP.
Build it and they will come.
Yeah. Well,
I got it.
Yeah. But I also don't really believe in that philosophy either. Because
I thought that's what you just described.
No. But we're not just building it and hoping they come. We are building it and making sure that they come. That's different.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Good alteration. All right. Second use case.
Yeah. The second use case, can you remind me? It's like they don't want to.
In other words, I am a company out there and I'm like, well, I'm using all these models and I'm going to use it for some of my solutions. Yeah. How do I know that what I'm doing is not going to be illegal in the future? I'm not using.
Yes. I think my recommendation for them, right, is make sure that you license and use models that company in the first part of the question has registered on Story, so that you have full attribution of what you're licensing and what you're using. Because a lot of AI companies today, when they provide a model to use, they don't give that list of receipts alongside with it, right? It's just a black box. But the black box is not going to be a good excuse in the future. So make sure that you license model, that company should make sure that it licenses or uses models that have that full attribution. And if they're models that are registered on Story, ideally with the training data, right, also registered on Story. And we're going to make this happen through Poseidon. Like all of that training data is already registered on Story, for example. This is going to be possible. They can choose to, they should choose to use models that have that, so they can point to it and say, hey, if you need attribution and you need oversight into what data went into this model, just look here, and you have the full lineage, the full genealogy of the model all the way back to the raw data.
All right, look, we're coming up on an end. Is there anything that I didn't ask you or anything you wanted to say that you'd like to make sure that the listeners hear?
Like I think right now, people are waking up to this data side of AI, right? They first had the magical moment of the capabilities, which is fully understandable, and now they're starting to realize, wait, like, how are these capabilities possible? Well, that's because every AI model stands on the shoulders of giants, which are us. We are those giants, right? Every model is trained on everyone's on the history of mankind, basically, right? And so we also need to be conscious that this, if we want this to continue in the future, we need to create a sustainable model, right? Scaling AI requires a sustainable data supply. It requires contributor buy-in, so people will contribute and want to contribute to models for a long time to come, and whether this is passively generated data, actively contributed data, or data inferred from behavior, right? But yes, long-term AI success requires sharing the upside and requires making the contributors of what goes into models stakeholders. I really want to emphasize that we see these AI models as these geniuses that are almost like oracles that somehow have appeared out of nothing. But they haven't appeared out of nothing. They literally are standing on our shoulders, right? On everyone's shoulders. Everyone as a collective humanity is propping up these models and making them possible. So it's only fair that we create a synergistic relationship between models and us. And obviously, like, I'm a very optimistic and techno-optimist person, and I think we will figure this out because AI can have massively positive effects on medicine, on productivity, even on physical systems, robotics, whatever. But to make this possible, the data we have today is not enough. And so we're going to need a hell of a lot more data. And that is only possible if everyone is willing to contribute it. We need to have a trust layer between humans and AI, and that comes from transparency, attribution, and having incentives that make contributors stakeholders. So
pretty good summary, man. Pretty good. But hey, where can folks reach you, and where can folks reach Story?
Yeah, so Story you can reach at story.foundation, and there you can kind of start and learn more about Story. If you're a developer, you can go to our documentation, docs.story.foundation, or if you're a modern developer that doesn't touch code anymore and uses AI, you can just point your agent to our docs, and we have a page that's specifically built for AI agents to learn about Story and be able to basically learn, like, once they read that page, they'll be able to code using Story Tech. And personally, you can reach me on Twitter at Devrelius.
Wow, you might have to.
Yes,
I'll find you. Put it in the
Dev Aurelius, like Marcus Aurelius, but instead of the AU, it's
I see. Wow,
Dev Aurelius.
It's unique.
And, yeah,
fantastic. All right, thank you so much for being here, man. This is a great story on Story.
Thank you for having me. Nice. Thank you for having me.
Nicely named too. Yeah, so Story. I'm surprised that wasn't taken.
I'm sure it's taken in various degrees, but I like the name. It's
good luck to you, and good luck to your future endeavors. Yeah, we'll have you back on. We'll keep tabs on you and see how things are growing and see what you've learned, what's working, what's not. Love to have you back.
I would love to. And thank you for having me. Thank you for the insightful conversation, and really hope that we get to chat again in the future and hopefully bring a lot of good news.
My pleasure. Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, you're going to make $1 million. 80 trillion.
80 trillion. Exactly.
All right. Hey, podcast listeners, thank you for listening as well. We'll see you on the podcast. Hey, hit us on almartintalksdata@gmail.com. If you have feedback, we listen. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.